So we'll start. We'll start then. Namaskar.
Yes.
During this session, we shall continue reviewing the book Annam Bahukurvita, which we have started during the last session. This is the second part. The book doesn't have two parts. It is I who divided it into two parts for the sake of convenience. In this part, we have 6 subsections. The first of them is the 5 yajnas. A grahastha, according to the Vedic tradition, is supposed to perform 5 different yajnas, which, according to the scriptures, is mandatory. He should perform this. And what are these 5 yajnas? We will see in this. Then on the importance of Atithi, who is an Atithi and who is not an Atithi, is called Abhyagata. And the importance attached to this hospitality offered to an Atithi. According to the Vedic tradition, it is an extremely important yajna of the Grihastha. Then we will take 3 different examples. One from the time of Mahabharata, that is how Draupadi conducted her household responsibilities, including the 5 yajnas. That is about 3100 to 3200 BC, about 5000 years ago. Another from the historical times, what we call as the historical times, that is the 7th century, Emperor Harshavardhana of Kanyakubja, the manner in which he conducted his responsibilities. And the third one is from more recent times, from the 19th century, 1800, 1832, that period. The deep south in Tanjavur, how the king of Tanjavur, in a very restricted conditions, that he had lost his kingdom, but he was very keen on carrying out the responsibilities which the tradition and the Vedas have mandated for him to do, how he conducted himself. These are the 3 examples that we'll cite, and finally the message. So largely it is 3 stories. First, the yajnas. This is from the Puranas. I think it is Shiva Purana, where Bhagavan Shankara and Uma Devi, they are in a dialogue, in a discussion. And Uma Devi asks Shankara to explain the 5 yajnas pertaining to a grihastha. And the Lord responds. He says, just as all living beings live under the protection of their mothers, so do all the ashramas derive sustenance from the grihastha. So the tradition says, Dhanyo grihastha, because it is a very important ashrama which sustains other ashramas. Other ashramas are also important, but this is the root ashrama. This sustains, supports brahmacharis as well as sannyasis. So this ashrama is very important for the sustenance of a society. Therefore, it is said that Dhanyo grihastha. Bhagavan continues. He says, everybody is dependent upon the grihastha. Kings, impostors, artists and acrobats, snake charmers, cheats, thieves, and officers of the king, all of them look up to the grihastha for their sustenance. See the irony of this, even thieves and cheats depend on the grihastha for their sustenance. So do the scholars the wise and the skeptics. So do the men on the road who have traveled a great deal and have exhausted the victuals they carried for the journey. And so do many others depend upon the grahastha for their sustenance. He goes on to add, not only the people, but also the cats, the mice, dogs, pigs, parrots, pigeons, crows, reptiles of all kinds, and the bevies of birds and herds of animals that live in the forest. Not only in the society, but in the forest as well. And also the hundreds and thousands of moving and unmoving creatures of diverse kinds that live in the house, the cockroaches and the lizards included, the field or the burrow. All of them, O Devi, live off what the grahastha earns through his karma, his actions. Essentially, the root of the society. The society is rooted in the grahastha. Continues. The virtue earned by the one who lends unstinted support to the dependent people and other living beings that look up to him for sustenance and who knows that sustaining them is indeed his dharma. Such a one, having fulfilled the dharma of grahastha for 12 years, attains the merit that accrues to those who perform an Ashwamedha after having first accomplished all other yajnas. So it is extremely important. It is called the 5 yajnas, the Pancha Maha Yajna it is called. This unqualified insistence of the Vedas on the daily undertaking of an observance is a vrata, that emphasizes human responsibility towards the sustenance of all, is of course related to the Indian understanding of human life as a gift that is constituted of and is sustained by all aspects of creation. Man is thus born in and lives in Rina. See, the idea is essentially drawn from the philosophy of the Vedas. Man is born and lives in the Rina, it says. Rina means debt to all creation, and it therefore becomes his duty to recognize this debt and undertake to repay it every day. Whoever is born in Rina is in being, whoever is born in Rina, and in being born, he is in Rina to the Devas, Rishis, Pitrus, and Manushyas. What is not mentioned here is the Bhutas. Deva is obvious, Rishi also is obvious, the Gurus, the Pitrus, the ancestors, and the normal human beings in the society, and also the Bhutas. Bhutas means the environment, including all kinds of creatures. It's not merely human beings, but a vaster reference. And what is Deva Yajna? I'm quoting this from Shatapatha Brahmana. Shatapatha Brahmana is a commentary on the Yajurveda, commentary by Yajnavalkya, Rishi Yajnavalkya. He performs Yajna because he is born in Rina to the Devas. Therefore, he does Deva Yajna. It is because of the Rina that he does this for them. It is because of the Rina that he performs Yajna for the Devas and offers Homa to them. 5 types of Yajna: Deva Yajna, Brahma Yajna, Brahma Yajna is also known as Rishi Yajna. It is the debt acknowledged to the Guru and also the scriptures. He says, and he learns and recites what the rishis have taught, that is the scriptures, because he is born in Rina to the rishis. It is because of the Rina that he does this for them. Learning and reciting thus, he is acknowledged by the wise as the protector of the treasure of the learning of the rishis. Our tradition is an oral tradition. It has to be recited every day and passed on to the next generation as a oral tradition. That is called Brahma Yajna. Therefore, it is mandatory for a Grihastha to read the scriptures every day. Then Pitri Yajna. And he desires for progeny because he is born in Rina to the Pitris. It is because of the Rina that he does this for them. It is because of this that he keeps the line of progeny of the Pitris continuing without a break. He seeks progeny and therefore he is indebted to the Pitris. Therefore, acknowledging this debt as the tradition demands, maybe once in a year, or maybe every month, maybe every day, according to the tradition, this acknowledgement, the Shraddha Karma, the Tarpana, etc., are known as the Pitri Yajna. Then the Manushya Yajna. And he offers hospitality to other human beings because he is born in Rina to the Manushyas. It is because of this Rina that he does this for them. It is because of this that he offers hospitality and food to others. He who does all this fulfills all his obligations. For him, all is attained and all is conquered. The Panchamaha Yajna thus is not an observance that is undertaken for the sake of earning merit or virtue. It is merely a matter of accepting and endeavoring to repay debts that are incurred by the fact of being born and living in the world. It is merely being humanly responsible. It is essential. It is responsibility. It is, what do you say? It is not something which is earned over and above our normal. It is not our goodness or it is not our greatness that makes us acknowledge this. It is the essential acceptance of the Rina and therefore repaying the debt. That is called a Yajna here. Veda defines 5 different types of Mahayajna for the Grihasthas. Deva Yajna, essentially the puja, patha, that is patana, havan, etc. Pitri Yajna is Shraddha Karma, Tarpana, etc. Brahma Yajna is Swadhyaya, that is studying of scriptures, Patana, Patana, teaching them, etc. Manushya Yajna is Athithi Satkar, Annadana, Vidyadana, Seva Karya, etc. Bhuta Yajna is Go Puja comes essentially part of Bhuta Yajna, Go Kainkarya, the Seva, and also support to the creatures around, which is called the Bhuta Yajna. The Prakriti, many people keep water and food outside their house for the animals to drink or the birds to eat. That is called Bhuta Yajna. The Yajnavalkya Smriti says, the classical texts, in fact, make it clear that the Panchamahayajna observance and especially the feeding of guests arriving at one's door is enjoined upon the Grihasthas of all Varnas. Yajnavalkya Smriti especially asserts that a Shudra Grihastha should never neglect the performance of Panchamahayajna observance, though he may abbreviate the ritual associated with the offering of food to only the recitation of Namaskara mantra. But otherwise, a Brahmin is enjoined to do it very ceremonially. The Mahabharata also narrates the story of a Nishada Dasyu, Kayavya. His name is Kayavya, achieving great merit by propitiating his parents and by ensuring that everybody in the neighborhood regularly receives food and care at his hands, at the hands of one who, being a Nishada, is apart from the four Varnas and being a dacoit, stands apart from society. The Nishada Varga is seen as outside the four Varnas. He lives in the forest normally, but yet, according to the classical texts, guests of all Varnas, including the Shudras, are entitled to receive hospitality as well as offer hospitality, even at the household of a Brahmana Grihastha. And even Chandalas have to be looked after and propitiated by the performer of the Panchamahayajna. That means nobody is outside the range of these yajnas. That's what Mahabharata says in the Shanti Parva. And about Atithi, there are two varieties in this. One is called Atithi, another is called Abhyagata. And in Mahabharata, I think Krishna defines this to Yudhishthira. In the Mahabharata, Sri Krishna, while advising Yudhishthira on the discipline of Annadana, emphasizes the distinction between a guest who is already acquainted. If he is related to you in any way, you or your wife, in any way, is already known to you, a friend who is known to you, if he comes, he is called Abhyagata. He is not called Atithi. And the one who comes unknown and uninvited, unannounced, uninvited, unknown, such a person is known as Atithi. A Grihastha, of course, must offer reverential hospitality to both the Abhyagata and the Atithi. But it is the feeding of the Atithi that forms an essential component of Manushya Yajna. The Abhyagata is like a member of the household, and as Manu would explain, he eats after the Atithi along with the family of the host. Atithi has to be fed first with the due ceremony, if you know the ceremonies. But he should be fed first, reverentially, with great respect. The Manusmriti says about Atithi, the coming of an unknown, uninvited, and unexpected Atithi in the evening. Manu says, a guest who comes in the evening is brought to the householder's house by the sun himself. He should never be turned away, and he should never be made to stay hungry in the house, whether he comes at the proper or improper time. In fact, in the Kathopanishad, Nachiketa reaches Yama's house, and Yama was out of his station. And the householders in Yama's household, people invite him inside and he declines to enter the house because there is no male member in the house. He says that I'll stay outside. Nor did he partake any food. Food was offered, but he did not take. 3 days later, Yama comes and he was He was deeply disturbed that an Atithi who did not take food and he stayed hungry in my house for 3 days and 3 nights. It is like the forest fire. He says that I have to propitiate him first, and in order to propitiate, he offers 3 boons to Nachiketa. Vishnu Purana advises that before partaking of his meal, a grahastha should stand outside the house in anticipation of an Atithi, looking for an Atithi, for at least the time it takes to milk a cow, waiting for a guest to arrive. Maybe some 15 minutes, maybe some 20 minutes. He has to stand outside the house, look for a possible guest for the night. That's Vishnu Purana. Yeah. Manu says, the householder should not eat anything that has not been offered to the guest. This is the discipline. He should not eat something for himself without offering it to the guest. Offering reverential hospitality to a guest brings the host wealth, honor, and long life and an abode in the heavens. However, there are exceptions. Exceptions in terms of the priority of feeding. Exceptions are young married women, young unwed girls, the sick, and the pregnant women ought to be fed even before the guests. Should not look for time or sequence in that. The householder need have no hesitation in this regard. That's the mandate from Manu. And the etiquette of feeding, Sri Krishna tells Yudhishthira that a tired guest brings gods and ancestors in his wake to the door of the Grahastha. Devas and Pitris follow the guests. When the Atithi is honored, the Devas and Pitris are honored. When he is satisfied, they are propitiated. And when the Atithi is turned away, the Devas and Pitris also turn away. Therefore, Sri Krishna advises that even if a Chandala comes as an Atithi, he must be offered reverential hospitality by the Grihastha. This has always been the refrain throughout the scriptures that whatever is offered has to be offered with respect, with reverence, with feeling. Then there is another aspect, another version known as the Bhiksha. Bhiksha is given to either sannyasis or to the brahmacharis. Bhiksha must be offered to all those who seek. The brahmacharis who are engaged in disciplined study of their assigned branch of knowledge are, however, to be offered bhiksha with proper ceremony and respect, with the proper invocation of welfare for the receiver. Manusmriti warns of the great disasters that befall those who offer bhiksha to the deserving carelessly, with contempt and condescension, as it were. Offering bhiksha, says Manu, is like performing homa to the fire that resides at the mouth of a deserving seeker. It is the Agni that resides in his stomach. Aham Vaishwanaro va Praninam Deham Ashritaha. Krishna says in the Gita that I am the fire residing in the stomach of beings. So offering food is like offering a havis to the homa. Now into the stories. This is Draupadi, the queen of Pandavas, during a discussion in the Vanaparva, when she meets Satyabhama, wife of Sri Krishna, they have an intimate conversation during which she narrates her responsibilities and how she carried out those responsibilities while she was in Indraprastha. That she was the empress of Indraprastha and she was in charge of her household as well as the palace, as a queen in the palace, says Draupadi. While speaking to Satyabhama about her daily routine, tells her that she eats only after feeding everyone else, including her husbands. She seems to have taken the burden of running the Pandava household upon her shoulders, and she almost single-handedly runs it, leaving Yudhishthira free to attend to his other responsibilities. She accounts for the income and expense of the Pandava household. She looks after and supervises the work of the various dependents. She performs the Panchamahayajna, and while doing all these, she takes care that she does not go beyond the wishes and desires of the Pandava brothers in any of her actions. Says Draupadi, I perform Bhiksha, Bali, and Shraddha. I undertake Sthali Paka Yajna. Sthali Paka Yajna means cooking special foods at the appropriate occasions. Different occasions call for different type of special foods. That is called Sthali Paka Yajna. I undertake that. I cook that, she says. I offer proper hospitality to the venerable ones. I perform all these dharmas that are followed in the families and were earlier taught to me by my mother-in-law and also others that I know. I observe all these day and night untiringly, and I follow Yama, Niyama rules of self-control and hygiene of both body and mind to the best of my abilities. I do not sleep while my husbands are awake. I do not eat while they have not eaten. And I do not adorn myself beyond what they find proper. I do not speak ill of my mother-in-law. I keep myself always under control. See, this is Draupadi. Draupadi is said to be the Agni Kanya. And she had tremendous control over her husbands. She had 5 of them, but she had great control over all of them. And the reason why she gained control is her moral supremacy, the manner in which she conducted herself and herself throughout. That's why she derived a great moral authority on the matters of the state as well. Continues Draupadi. Carrying pots of food in their hands, 100,000 women attendants of Yudhishthira used to be engaged in feeding the guests day and night, and I supervised that. And I organized for all these great numbers, listened to their requirements, and provided for them. I looked after the inmates of the inner household and all the dependents of the king, including even the cowherds and the shepherds. I kept myself informed of all that they did or did not do. O Satyabhama, they, the bulls of Bharatavarsha, that is Bharatarshabha, the word is Bharatarshabha, translated as bulls of Bharatavarsha, left the entire responsibility of the household on me and engaged themselves in upasana, worship and veneration. and actions proper to that. This is the author of Annam Bahu Kurvita, authors. They are saying this. Draupadi, of course, is concerned not only with the running of the kingly household, but also with the queenly power. Draupadi and Sri Krishna are two important personages of Mahabharata who display no ambivalence about the acquisition and application of power. Both of them understood the meaning of power, the requirement and the utility of power, and the importance of gaining that power and using it properly. In fact, both of them were not rulers. Draupadi, of course, was a queen, but Krishna was not a ruler. He was not a ruler even in Dwaraka. It was Balarama who was the ruler. But they understood the importance of power, acquisition and application of power. Many times you find Yudhishthira reluctant to take up responsibility, especially after the Mahabharata war. So many people had died, so many people were killed, and Yudhishthira was in a depression because he felt responsible for this war. So he was reluctant to assume power. It is then that Sri Krishna, Draupadi, Vyasa, and Acharya Bhishma, they convince him to take up this responsibility and run the kingdom. Bhishma was on the war front. And still Yudhishthira was unable to respond to this demand. So they asked him to perform a Ashwamedha Yajna. It is an engagement, at the same time it is an activity involving a large number of people and of course a full-time engagement for the king. And it is not for a short duration, it was for 1 year. Require a lot of activity and a lot of thinking, planning, etc. So he said that you do this Ashwamedha Yajna, you will overcome your depression. And that's how Yudhishthira decides to do that Ashwamedha Yajna. And recalling her days in Indraprastha, Draupadi remembers how thousands of great warrior kings used to sit at the feet of Yudhishthira, and how 100,000 elephants and 100,000 horses used to form his entourage whenever he chose to travel out of Indraprastha. She recalls these attributes of great power, especially to Bhimasena in the Virata Parva, while trying to induce him to save her from the insulting attentions of Kichaka, the dandyish general of the armies of Virata. She was troubled by Kichaka and she goes and seeks help from Bhimasena. Of all her husbands, it was Bhimasena whom she trusted that he would help. She wakes him up in the night and then tries to convince him to help her. Initially, he was reluctant. He said that if I do this, my elder brother, my master, he will get angry. I do not wish to get into trouble with him. So you go to others, go and ask Arjuna, etc., etc. It is at that time she recalls all these things to Bhimasena and somehow induces him to accept the responsibility of protecting her. She remembers all this power and all that, but the fondest memories of Draupadi, it seems, are of the great household where food continued to be served to all comers unceasingly throughout the day and night. Even though she admires power, it is this dana aspect of the yajna that she remembers with fondness. and were not only the scholars and sannyasins, but also the old, the young, and the handicapped, and indeed all those who had no one else to look after them found shelter, food, and care. She remembers this care and feeding that streamed through the great household of Yudhishthira, the king of Indraprastha, much more than the symbols of his power and prestige as a Chakravarti. And she seems to be emphasizing the greatness of the householder rather than the power of the king, even at a time of great distress and imminent humiliation in the Virata capital. That was Draupadi. Now let us look at the historical times, the time of Harshavardhana. This is the 7th century AD. Harshavardhana ruled from Kanyakubja. Today it is known as Kanauj. It is near Prayagraj. During the 7th century, that is 606 to 647, about 41 years, he ruled from Kanauj. During his time, a Chinese pilgrim had come to India, Huan Sang. Huan Sang visited many parts of India, including Kanyakubja and Nalanda. Nalanda is in Bihar, Kanyakubja is in Uttar Pradesh. So he stayed with Harshavardhana for several weeks, and he was about to go, then Harshavardhana invites him for a festival which is as long as 75 days. Amongst the great kings that have ruled India is Harshavardhana. We know the most about his reign mainly from the detailed records of the Chinese scholar Huan Sang, who visited India during his time. And what is most widely known about Harshavardhana is that every few years, that is once in 5 years, he emptied his treasury and distributed all the accumulated riches of the empire amongst the people. Once in 5 years. Huan Sang narrates in minute detail the great yajna of Harshavardhana. He refers to him as Shiladitya Raja. That took place during the visit of Huan Sang, which the revered scholar himself attended on the personal invitation of Harshavardhana. This is from Huan Sang's record. A Dana Satra for 75 days was conducted. The king said, "Your disciple," is referring to the Buddhist monk, "your disciple, succeeding to the royal authority, has been Lord of India for 30 years and more. I have constantly regretted the small increase to my religious merit, punya, resulting from a want of previous good deeds. I have not done enough of good deeds. In consequence of this, I have accumulated every kind of treasure and precious substance in the kingdom of Prayaga and between the banks of the two rivers, that is between the fork between Ganga and Jamuna. I have established a great religious convocation every 5 years, to attend which all the Shramanas, Shramana means Bauddha Bhikshu, and Brahmanas of the 5 Indies are invited. And besides these, the poor and the orphans and the destitute. On this occasion, during 75 days, the great distribution of alms called the moksha is attended to. I have completed 5 of these assemblies and am now about to celebrate the 6th. Why does not the master, that is Yuan sign, why does not the master delay his departure till then, and so, by witnessing the spectacle, rejoice with us? That is the invitation. And the monk accepts this. And together they go to the Dhanashala, Yajnashala. The king directed them to portion out on this space a square enclosure for distributing the charitable offerings, enclosed by a bamboo hedge 1,000 paces on either side, and in the middle to erect many scores of thatched buildings in which to deposit all the treasures intended for distribution. To wit, gold, silver, fine pearls, red glass, the precious substance called the Indranila pearl and the Mahanila pearl, etc. He constructed, moreover, by the side of these several hundred storehouses in which to place the silk and cotton garments, the gold and silver money, and so on. Outside the enclosing hedge, he caused to be made places for partaking of food. In front of the various depositories of treasure, he, moreover, erected some 100 or so long buildings arranged like the marketplaces of our capital, in which some 1,000 people might sit down for rest. The king directed them, that the people who have come for the yajna, the king directed them to portion out of this space a square enclosure for distributing charitable offerings. Sorry, I have already done this. Having arrived at the spot, they found a body of people amounting to about 5 lakhs or so already arrived. On the first day of the first period, they installed the image of Buddha within one of the thatched buildings on the field of charity. They then distributed precious articles of the first quality and clothing of the same character, and offered exquisite meats. Meats means not flesh. He's talking about meats means sweet meats, that is sweets. Because Harshavardhana had banned killing of animals for food. While they scattered flowers to the sound of music. At the close of the day, they retired to their tents. The second day, they installed the image of Aditya Deva and distributed precious things and clothings in charity to half the amount of the previous day. The third day, they installed the image of Ishwara Deva and distributed gifts as on the day before. On the fourth day, they gave gifts to 10,000 of the religious community arranged in 100 ranks. Each received 100 pieces of gold. Each received 100 pieces of gold, one pearl, one cotton garment, various drinks and sweetmeats, flowers and perfumes. The fifth arrangement was the bestowal of gifts to the Brahmanas, which lasted for 20 days. The sixth turn related to the heretics, which lasted 10 days. Heretics means those who did not belong to the Buddhist tradition. So this bhikshu calls them heretics. The next occasion was the bestowal of alms on those who came from distant spots to ask for charity, This lasted for 10 days. The eighth distribution was to the poor and the orphan and destitute, which occupied a month. By the time the accumulation of 5 years was exhausted, except the horses, elephants, and military accoutrements, which were necessary for maintaining order and protecting the royal estate, nothing remained. Please note that he did not dispense the army. He maintained an army, which is a very same thing. If he had dismantled, his fate would not have been different from that of Ashoka. So except for the horses, elephants, and military accoutrements, which were necessary for maintaining order and protecting the royal estate, nothing remained. Besides these, the king freely gave away his gems and goods, his clothing and necklaces, his earrings, bracelets, chaplets, neck jewel, and bright head jewel. All these he freely gave without stint. All being given away, he begged from his sister an ordinary second-hand garment, and having put it on, he paid worship to the Buddhas of the 10 regions. And he exulted with joy. With his hands closed in adoration, he said, "In amassing all this wealth and treasure, I ever feared that it was not safely stored in a strong place. But now, having bestowed this treasure in the field of religious merit, I can safely say it is well bestowed. Oh, that I may in all my future births ever thus religiously give in charity to mankind my stores of wealth, and this and thus
2n pi minus pi less than or less than theta minus pi by 4 less than 2n pi, where n is belongs to I. That implies 2n pi minus 3 pi by 4 less than theta less than 2n pi plus pi by 4.
I may all my future births ever thus religiously give in charity to mankind my stores of wealth, and thus complete in myself the 10 independent powers, that is called the Dashabala, 10 powers of Buddha. That is Harshavardhana. Now let us come to the 19th century, Tanjore, South India. During this period, which we are referring to 1800 to 1832, 1798 to 1832, that is the period during which there was a king of this small kingdom. His name was Sarfoji Maharaj, Sarfoji Bhonsle. He was a descendant in the Shivaji's clan. Shivaji's half-brother Venkoji was assigned this area when Shivaji extended his kingdom to the south. Venkoji was asked to rule from the south. So Venkoji came to Tanjavur and established a center of power. He was a representative of the Chhatrapati. See, Sarfoji belongs to the lineage of Venkoji. So it's originally a Maratha, but residing in Tanjavur. Sarfoji was born in 1777 in the royal house of Chhatrapati Shivaji. He was adopted as his son by Raja Tulaja of Tanjavur on January 23, 1787. When he was 10-year old, he was adopted by the king. Sarfoji was born in the household. Sarfoji was born in the household of the royal family, that is, household of the king. But he was not the son of a king, but he was one of the he belongs to the same family. So he was adopted by the king as a son, and he was coronated soon after at the age of 10. Obviously, the king was probably had realized that his end had come, and he died soon after. The boy was entrusted to the care of Reverend Christian Frederick Schwartz, a Danish missionary. Soon after, the king died, and his half-brother Amar Singh usurped the throne and denied the young prince the benefit of education. So Sarfoji was in a very tight corner. His kingdom was usurped and he was about 10 years old. At this juncture, Reverend Schwartz intervened to save the young prince and sent him to Madras, where he was educated by Reverend Wilhelm Gehrig of the Lutheran mission. Soon he became proficient in Tamil, Telugu, Urdu, Sanskrit, French, German, Danish, Greek, Dutch, and Latin. 10 languages. He was a genius, and he also was a scientist. He had developed laboratories there for conducting his scientific research. Very brilliant man, and you will soon see the drafting of his letter indicates his brilliance. Meanwhile, the British interposed on his behalf, and Sarfoji was saved, and he ascended the throne of Tanjore on 29 June 1798 when he was 21. In return for the assistance, Sarfoji was forced to cede the administration of the kingdom to the British, and in return was granted an annual pension of 1 lakh star pagodas and 1/5 of the state's land revenue. The British intervened and usurped the kingdom. 4/5 of the revenue the British would take. 1/5 of the revenue they granted it to the king. So he was a king only in name. He was actually heavily dependent on the British forces, British resident. So the actual administrator of his kingdom were the British resident, and they started meddling in every affair. See, the state treasury was being handled by the king's family earlier. Now the British started handling it. So they started tightening the screws everywhere. It is then that he wrote a letter. A large part of the coastal lands and the port duties in Tanjore, it seems, was assigned to the Chatrams and Mathams, the institutions of hospitality and learning prevalent in the Tamil lands, which were managed by the queens of the royal household. The tradition is that, like Draupadi managed the Panchamahayajna of Yudhishthira, here the queens would manage that. And they're assigned income for that, from the ports, port duties, etc. The British, who after annexing Tanjore in 1799, undertook an inquiry into the circumstances under which the coastal lands and revenues from the ports had come to be assigned to the queens. In response to such an inquiry, the Raja of Tanjore, Sarfoji Maharaja, wrote a letter to the British resident Benjamin Turin, apprising him in detail of the functioning of the Chatrams and the importance he attached to these institutions. The letter, in its graphic detail, constitutes an important document of the times. Sarfoji Maharaja wrote, this is from the letter. The ground along the seashore where these charitable institutions are the most numerous is of a very inferior quality. So the land revenue is less, so the port, customs, etc. were assigned to this. But it is also the road to Rameshwaram, and 40,000 persons from all parts of India, from Banaras, Oudh, Delhi, Aurangabad and Pune, pass and repass every year. For the accommodation of these travelers principally, the chatrams have been established, and to each of them a pagoda, that is a temple, chowltries and schools are annexed. Chatram includes all these. I will now explain to you the nature and extent of the charities dispensed by them. All travelers from the Brahmin to the Pariah, inclusive, pilgrims of every description, including the yogis and jangams, atits and bairagis, are fed with boiled rice. Those who do not choose to eat the boiled rice receive it unboiled with spices, etc. If you want to cook yourself, you can take rice and cook. These distributions continue till midnight, and when a bell is rung and proclamation made requiring all those who have not been fed to appear and take the rice prepared for them. See the tone of the letter. He says the chatrams would offer food. It is not the food will be thrown at them. He says that at midnight, when they're about to close, a bell will be rung. Bell would be rung, and a proclamation made to the effect that all those who have not been fed to appear and take the rice prepared for them. It is not just an announcement that we are going to close. No. He said that please come and have food. The travelers who may be unable to proceed on their journey are fed as long as they remain at the chatram. There is no date bar. It is not for 3 days. It is for as many days as you stay. In each chatram, a teacher to each of the 4 Vedas is appointed. 4 of them. And a schoolmaster and doctors. Doctors skillful in the cure of diseases, swellings and poison of reptiles. Very common afflictions for a traveler. Swellings, disease, cure of diseases, swellings and the poison of reptiles, snake bites, etc. All the orphans of strangers who may come to the chatram are placed under the care of the schoolmaster. They are also fed 3 times a day. They are orphans but taken care. And once in 4 days, they are anointed with oil. They receive medicine when they require it. Clothes also are given to them and the utmost attention paid to them. They are instructed in the sciences to which they may express a preference. And after having obtained a competent knowledge of them, the expenses of their marriage are defrayed. He is referring to the orphans who are staying in the chatrams permanently. After they having obtained competent knowledge of them, the expenses of their marriages are defrayed. Travelers who fall sick at the chatram or before their arrival, if they fall sick, receive medicines and the diet proper for them and are attended with respect and kindness until their recovery. The obsequies of those who die during their residence at the Chatram are performed according to the rites of their caste. Milk is provided for infants. Pregnant women are entertained with kindness. And if they happen to be delivered at the Chatram, their expenses are defrayed. Medicines are given to them and they are permitted to remain in the Chatram for 3 months after their delivery. Those who apply to the Chatram and state their inability to defray the expenses of receiving the Brahminical thread or of their marriage or of the performance of ceremonies subsequent to their parents' death receive a sum of money proportionate to the occasion. This is the role of Chatram, and the queen conducts that. Queen handles the administration. Says the king. He says, the Tanjore country is celebrated over all the world for its charities. It is called Dharmarajya. And I consider the reputation which reverts upon me through all the countries from the appellation of Dharmarajya as the most honorable distinction of my rank. The revenues appropriated to the support of these charities by my ancestors and my father, Tulja Raja, have never been included in the public revenue of the country. They invariably cherished and supported the charities. It is my earnest wish to do the same. The superintendence of them has always descended from the elder to the younger queen, my mother, and now my wife. I have a perfect confidence that this custom of my ancestors will not be deviated from, and that I shall not suffer the disgrace of seeing it abolished in my reign. That is the letter of a 24-year-old king, very passionate, very sensitive, very thoughtful, to the British residents not to scotch these charities. It is looked after like the queen will be the mother for his kingdom, for the citizens of his kingdom. And this tradition is supported by Dharma. This tradition gives him an appellation of Dharmarajya. See, in India, monarchy was largely successful, unlike the rest of the world. In Europe, monarchy has been very oppressive. In the rest of the world, it was very oppressive. But in India, monarchy was tempered. It was tempered with the Dharma. Therefore, we have a series, a very long list of great kings in this land. If you look at the Pratasmarana, half the names in the Pratasmarana belong to the kings. They have been very kind. So, the message of the book can be expressed using the Vedic mandate drawn from the Taittiriya Upanishad. Annam bahukurvita tadvratam. The Veda mandates that procure and share food in abundance. That be your mandate. And the same verse continues and says, Annavan annado bhavati, mahan bhavati, prajaya pashubir brahma varchasena, mahatkirtya. Annavan annado bhavati. He who feeds, he eats. Mahan bhavati, he will attain greatness. Prajaya, he gains in progeny. Pashu, in cattle. Brahmavarchasena, in radiance, that is spirituality. Mahat kirtya, and in glory. Therefore, observe it as a vrata, tad vratam. That's it. So this book highlights one of the great traditions of this country, originating from the Vedas, continuing through the Puranas, the historical times, until the recent times. So whereas Indian culture was able to flourish, this tradition also flourished because it is considered as one of the most important fundamental yajna. Giving food, annadana, is considered to be the most important of the yajnas because it is very fundamental. There are other reasons, but it is very fundamental. You cannot pursue other disciplines, other pursuits like study or spirituality, religiosity. Everything depends upon the person being well fed and is not hungry, he is satisfied. Therefore, it is of fundamental importance. Maybe you can say that Vidyadana is superior to Annadana in some other sense because it is subtler, it is difficult to pursue, there will be fewer teachers. All those things are true, but then Anna is fundamental. I think Swami Vivekananda said this, you can't preach religion to a hungry stomach. It has to be propitiated, and it can be propitiated. Another important aspect of Annadana is that here the person who receives this dana can get satisfied. If there are 100 people who have sat for dinner, all the 100 can be satisfied. In all other types of dana, where the wealth is involved or anything else is involved, there is still scope for the receiver to feel discontented. You may say that if you give him 10 rupees, he'll say that why not another 5 rupees more? It is possible. But in Annadhanam, he'll say enough, enough, poor. So that is the greatness of Annadhanam, greatness and importance of Annadhanam. And this book highlights that. And this Center for Policy Studies have published several books, well researched, very well documented, and available free. You can read it online. You can purchase the books, of course, but you can read them online as well. Okay, so I'll stop here. Now, if you have any questions or comments, I would like to hear.
Thank you, sir. So now the session is open for question and answers.
No questions. Okay. I recommend another book by the same authors, that is Timeless India, Resurgent India. Some aspects of the Indian society and polity are expounded on that. Because this center has been inspired by Sri Dharmapal. And these people consider themselves as the Shishyas of Sri Dharmapal. Timeless India, Resurgent India. And there are many other books also, but I shall certainly recommend this book to you.
Are there any questions from the audience? Fine, sir. So let us end the session now
Yeah.
with the Shanti mantra.
Yeah.
Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you, sir. Thanks everyone for attending the session.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.